everyone. Kevin Rose here. Welcome to 100 Proof, July 15th edition. I am so stoked to be joined by Carly from Overpriced JPEGs and Derek Edwards, of course. Carly, welcome.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad we've made this happen.
Are you still Overpriced JPEGs, or are you changing the name?
To underpriced, yes. Reasonably priced.
Reasonably priced.
Only art block. Yeah.
Only art blocks.
It's still JPEGs? Overpriced. Just art blocks JPEGs. The only thing that I feel like matters these days. No. Still overpriced JPEGs. It's always been tongue in cheek, so remains so.
I love it. Derek, good to see you as well, brother.
Great to be here. Excited to dig into it with Carly. This is going to be a fun one.
Absolutely. Yeah, Carly, for people that don't know your show, they need to go check it out because there's not a lot. You're the only other NFT podcast that I think I listen to. Maybe I'm missing one. I don't know if there's any others. I'm sure I'm missing a couple others that are good, but your show's great.
I am deeply flattered by that. And it's mutual. As you know, I'm a big fan of Proof. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, let's jump into it. We got a lot of stuff to cover. I don't know who did the research on our doc this week. I think, Carly, you put a lot of this stuff in there, which was amazing. Which one did you, since you're the guest here, Carly, which one did you want to start with?
I was thinking we should talk about this meta, right, that we have going on right now in the space of like free mint CCO projects. I feel like Goblin Town really kicked that off, and then we've just seen it explode in terms of these projects launching with this strategy. There's a couple in particular I think are interesting. Wizards we should definitely talk about. There's also one coming out called Potatoes that I thought could be interesting because Kevin, you may know it's like part of Meme Land, 9gag. I think you're sort of connected to that crew, and I had some thoughts there. But I don't know, do you guys have thoughts just generally speaking about this trend we're seeing right now of free mint plus CCO?
Yeah, I can jump in. I'll kick us off because I think this is such a fascinating conversation. I think the free mint meta, I think there's like a number of reasons why we've seen this kick off. I think not least of which, like we were kind of joking about it at the very beginning, but with like the macro sell-off and like the temperature around like how to allocate in a space that seems to not be, it seems to be a bit in a bear market. I think teams are trying to find creative ways to like bootstrap community, to achieve like that similar level of like community driven IP, without maybe with keeping like the stakes a little bit lower. And so we've seen this proliferation where teams are creatively launching free mints, and building like, the same royalty structure on the back end. So as these things change hands, revenue flows back to the team, which gives them the treasury by which to like create lines of effort and continue to build the project as these things, get bigger over time. But I think it almost levels the playing field in a lot of ways for both the collectors, without, putting requisite skin in the game, but being part of something, like being part of a ride before it really gets going. And I think it's created like this really interesting narrative where, I think people are willing to trust, or a bit like participate, I should say is a better word, in projects where like, there isn't that barrier, that financial barrier, of like participation that's usually predicated with like investing in an NFT collection or a project. So we're starting to see a ton of movement around free mints. And I think, we're seeing all sorts of experimentation after the free mint of like where these communities can go over time. But at a very high level, I think it's a very cool dynamic. What about you guys?
I'm just wondering how you get into these things because, a lot of the pushback that I've seen online is just people saying like, great, free mints, but they're oversubscribed 10x. Like, what are my chances? Bots are getting in there. Like, it seems like it obviously when something is free, it draws in quite a bigger crowd. So I don't know. I like it. I mean, obviously free is great. And if you're the first person to purchase, like, you're just paying gas, right? So there's hardly any downside there. But yeah, I don't know. Have you gotten to any of these, Carly? Have you bought any of these free mints?
I haven't gotten off. No, I similarly apparently am not in the right like Discord channels or something to find this stuff early enough. We need more pre-mint, free mint combos. Potatoes is one I'm looking at. Pre-mint can obviously help with the bot problem. They can do a little bit of trying to prevent that. Yeah. Then Potatoes is doing a pre-mint raffle before their free mint. And they were an interesting example because I have a theory here. And maybe Kevin, Derek, are you all familiar with Meme Land and 9gag and what they're doing?
Yeah, I was an angel investor in 9gag probably 15 years ago. So I still have some shares somewhere, but I'm not familiar with nothing ever happened there. I mean, they're still around, but yeah. So I'm not familiar with potatoes, and we should tell people it's potatoes with a Z on the end, correct?
Yeah. And this is obviously, I guess I don't need to say it, like, not financial advice. I don't own this. Like, I'm not pushing this project for any reason other than I think they might be doing something strategically that's might be valuable to other people. So, and Kevin, I think you're listed, I guess, because you invested in 9gag. You're actually listed on the Memeland website there, along with a number of others as sort of like advisor, investor folks. So my sense, and I can't say that this is definitely what's going on, but 9gag, this like meme site, very internet, sort of reminds me of Reddit 4chan site, has launched Memeland, which is like their Web3 property. And they've been talking about this Memeland NFT that they're going to launch for a while. I think it's their like 10K PFP project. They did the standard, well, maybe not standard, but like the proof model of launching this 420 tight-knit group, sort of like an alpha group, I think is what people are interpreting it as, drop called You the Real MVP, playing on the Kevin Durant meme. And that's at like a 27th floor right now. So again, I think people are really valuing it like it's an alpha community. Mm-hmm. What's striking to me though, is they've been talking about this Memeland NFT for a little while, and they're now launching Potatoes before they've launched their Memeland NFT. And Potatoes is this free mint CCO thing. And in order to get in the Potatoes like raffle list and wait list, you have to follow Memeland on Twitter and enter the Memeland Discord. So my hypothesis here is that 9gag CEO is savvy and is looking at this being like, if I launch my Memeland NFT project, I'm not going to sell out. I'm trying to use this as a fundraise. So why don't I get on this sort of popular free mint narrative to drive people to my community, get folks into the Potatoes ecosystem, and then hopefully get them down the line to buy sort of my Memeland NFT when I launch it. And I respect that, honestly. Like, and I'm a big fan of free mints. I think that's too often like people are grabbing cash up front and don't really have a plan for it. So doing a free mint and then having to deliver on something to keep your money flowing in is great. But I think that's a strategy that they're employing that I think could be interesting for others who were going to launch a project during this bear market period, and now we're like, oh no, I don't know if the community's there for me.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a lot of projects that reach out and they're like, what do I price this at? It's like a very common question. I'm sure, Derek, you get the same thing where it's like, they've been building before everything collapsed. They're getting ready to launch and they're like, do I do free? Do I do 0.01? So I think that's a very, very common thing.
Yeah, I think this idea that Carly's touching on as like employing the free mint as a strategy for like building the community and figuring out how to monetize later, I think we're going to start to see that more and more. There are trade-offs, like unquestionably. I think there is still demand for projects with great teams behind them that are willing to charge a price because to inform the quality of the work and inform the quality of what they've built and where the thing could sit in the future and the network that can get built with a well-resourced team. But I also think we're seeing the opposite, which is just like teams are seeing this meta where you can employ this free mint strategy, open up the top of the funnel to anybody to participate. There's a race to get in because people are, the expected value of a free mint is up there. And it's a strategy to like build a community early on. I think what will end up happening, like we've seen with the rest of the NFT space, is these strategies just become like mainstream, at which point like there becomes a sophistication by the consuming public to them, at which point like the arb is gone and you got to find a new meta if you want to.
Yeah, we just get habituated to the existing meta and then we got to push the line further.
Exactly. So I suspect that I think free mints will always exist. I think they're never going to go away. I think people are savvy now at how they can help. But I also think to the point Carly just made, like this will become, normalized. And I think over time, the consuming public will become sophisticated and they'll be less likely to even pay gas for a free mint if they don't actually see that there's value there.
The question that I have that I really would, it's in the data. We just have to go do the analysis, and I should ask one of my analysts to go do this work, is around how does the free price, does that mean And my guess would be yes, that there's more churn on the project than if someone pays something for it. One of my favorite books of all time is Predictably Irrational. Have you all read that book? It's fascinating. It's all about price discovery and the value of different objects. And like they did this analysis of a Best Buy ad that, the ones you used to get in the mail, and if you put a really expensive flat screen TV up in the upper right, but that's not the one you want to sell, but it sets that anchor price of it being really high, then everything else on the page looks like really cheap. And like, oh yeah, that $2,000 TV looks like the one I want because the one up here is $8,000, so it's all these different little social strategies on how to get people to purchase and how they find value in objects, right? So in my head, I wonder if you aren't more committed to a project and you are creating a more durable community when you actually ask them to pay something for it. I'd be curious to take a look at the churn numbers on free mint projects versus ones that actually charge. There's definitely, I should have him on the podcast. That you all have to read that book, and anyone listening, Predictably Irrational. It's fantastic. They did all these little experiments around different chocolates, and they set different price points. They take the same chocolate and they set one at like $10 and they set another one at like 25 cents. Then like, you try the chocolate, and of course, like the $10 one is fantastic and scored like way better off the charts in terms of how much they enjoyed it and how fancy they thought it was. And it's like, it's crazy. It's crazy. It's all based on what you pay for something. And so, there's a lot of projects that have been very successful that have been free mints. But I'd love to dive into the psychology behind all of that and the data as well.
Yeah. Did y'all track the Doodles bucket auction? I thought that was a cool price discovery mechanism.
No, tell me about that.
Okay. I love this. And this is actually something Kai Turner, who's a friend of mine, had been talking about like months ago. And he's friends with Jordan Castro and Poopy of the Doodles team. So I wonder if he didn't have maybe a role in this, but I don't know for sure. So instead of going a Dutch auction route or any of the other number of ways projects try and get the price discovery, they had these like Genesis boxes, and you would put in a blind bid, right? Like, how much you'd be willing to pay for it. And then they collected these over like 48 hours or so, and then took the average, and then based on that would give you, like, if you put in 100 ETH, and I think it came out to being like 0.5 ETH or something became the price that people would have to pay for it. You would get X number of these boxes based on that 0.5 ETH price because you put in 100 ETH. And actually, I said blind auction, but I think they actually allowed you to see what the going price was, so you could know. You could like put in more, so it would drive the price up, but only to the point that people could really pay. And it actually the price hovered around 0.5 ETH for these things for quite a while, like after it ended. So it seems like they did a good job finding like the proper equilibrium with it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's a really cool mechanic. I've heard about others working on blind auction mechanics. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Because you avoid too that like at the end of the Dutch auction when everybody realizes it's going to sell for an ETH or whatever, like, and then you just get those gas wars, and it's almost like yeah, you've sort of had this price discovery thing, but you haven't eliminated the gas war piece of the equation. And so I thought this was a way to really kill two birds with one stone.
Yeah, this is pretty interesting. I would be curious to know where the floor price is now. Like, it's been a couple of weeks.
It dropped a little. I think it's at like 0.35 or something. I checked a couple days ago, and so it had fallen.
Yeah, but very fascinating mechanic, and I love the experimentation. Like, I think it's funny listening to you, Carly. Like, I was like, this is super cool, and I think I'm so happy that we're seeing more experiments like this. There's so many trade-offs that happen with every one of these experiments. So like what they've done here is manage those trade-offs in ways that may be actually more beneficial for like the community that they're trying to build. But I think we're going to see just like more and more rapid experimentation around like what these drops can look like. I think we're seeing it with like, we are all going to die. We're seeing it with Goblin Town with the free mints. We're seeing it with the Dutch auction. We're now seeing it with like blind auctions. We're seeing it with like this mechanism that Doodles employed. So it's going to be fun to see if the industry converges around one of these or two of these here over the next couple of years, because it's been a lot of fun to see this play out.
Yeah, I've got a really fun one coming up for our next release that has never been done before. So that'll be fun. I'm having a hard time, Derek, sitting on that alpha. I've got
You're going to have to keep sitting on it, dude.
I got to keep sitting on it. We'll announce it next month at our Future Proof, that kind of novel drop mechanic that we're doing. So we're pretty excited about it.
That's awesome.
Definitely different than anything we've seen. Speaking of weird and awesome stuff, wizards, like what the hell is going on there? That is so badass. You got to explain this one.
Dude, Derek, do you want to explain? I have so many thoughts here. I don't know. Do you want to explain it, Derek? And then I can.
Sure, I can try my best. You actually flagged this for me, Carly, so I'm coming late to the game. So my understanding is it was also a free mint. Is that right? Like the Wizards free mint
CCO. It feels very Goblin Towny. This I think to me clearly pulled inspiration from Goblin Towns, like website vibes, like project vibes, totally.
Yeah. So this was end of last month. Wizards launched a free mint. Really interesting art. If folks can check it out. They implemented this staking feature where if
we should tell people how it's spelled, by the way, because people are going to be looking this up as we're talking about it. So it is WZRDS.
Correct. Basically, no vowels. Wizards without vowels.
So they introduced the staking feature, and essentially, if you staked your wizard, it sent your wizard into the forest to collect the mushroom. But if you didn't stake, your wizard was then labeled a cowzard. And then earlier this week, if you hadn't sent your wizard to the staking contract to go to the forest to collect mushrooms, wizards were now able to voluntarily burn tokens of cowzards that were listed for sale. Do I have that right, Carly?
Yeah. So yes, basically you can stake your wizard and then your wizard earns shrooms and then you can use the shrooms to burn wizards that were listed for sale. I believe it's only under 3.2 ETH, which is why you'll see for the last however many days, the floor has been 3.2 ETH on this project. Now, this was controversial because there were folks who were like, I was not given advance notice. That they tweeted out that this was going to be possible 2 hours before this functionality went live. So there are folks who had bought on the secondary, bought these wizards, then listed them for 0.5 ETH, had bought it at 0.3 ETH and got their wizard burned. 1,000 wizards got burned.
Now, wait, this was in the terms of service though, right? That they could do this from the get-go?
Yeah, so they're in the smart contract, you could kind of see it. There was ways to understand earlier on that this was going to happen. So, but I still understand the frustration for people who listed these and then got them burned. But I think this is sick for so many reasons. I don't know. I'll dive into thoughts unless you, Derek, do you want to give?
Yeah, I can.
Give your initial thoughts.
I love this. I loved stuff like this. There was another experiment called peacefall.xyz.
Oh, I own some Peace Falls, yeah.
Super cool experiment created by a group called Fictive Kin. And essentially the idea, if I remember correctly, was there was these ninja warriors. There was ninjas, there was brute fighters, there was, boxers, there was different character assets that you could earn. And essentially what you would do is you would send them to competition. You could choose peace and not fight with them, or you could choose fight. And if you chose fight, it went to this contract that allowed you to basically choose your battle move against a randomly assigned opponent. If you lost that match, your character died. And so you just basically had this dead NFT. If your character won, you would rise in the ranks. A bunch of people continued to choose fight over and over again and got to the highest level, which is level 5. And there's all sorts of potions that are getting airdropped to revive if you want to. And there's just really interesting game mechanics that are being employed through this this fighter game. There's now this master competition. I think it's being run now or it's coming up, where if you do have a level 5 fighter, you can enter this master competition and compete in the same on-chain battle with other fighters to win this grand prize. And I don't know if that grand prize has been announced yet. But it's these types of things with high stakes NFTs that I think is fascinating. I mean, if your character dies and it presumably no longer has value unless the creators of the game can figure out a mechanic by which to use that dead character inside of the game somehow. So maybe, there's fun ways you can kind of reinvigorate some of these dead assets. And it sounds like in the wizard game, Carly, you get a skull and that skull may be used for something in the future.
We don't know what it's used for yet, but
we don't know what it's used for.
Your wizard got burned, you got a skull.
But Kevin and I have talked about this a lot, where it's blockchains are the new board game. And if you have really great creators that can use this board game in very interesting ways, you can find that these types of games and experiences can rival those with great AAA graphics, just because we're now leaning into these principles of ownership, of on-chain stakes. It's a fun area of exploration, and I'm really excited to see projects like Wizards like really at the bleeding edge of it.
I think the whole Wizards fiasco was like, when I first heard about it, I was dying laughing. I'm like, this is hilarious. Like, people are getting like, imagine you're like just some degen that's like just trying to flip, right? And you list it, and you're like, okay, I'm going to, 2x or 3x, and all of a sudden your wizard gets burned. I mean, for some reason that is like, maybe it's twisted and sick, but I find that really funny, right? Like, you didn't read the terms of service. Actually, that's a good question though. Was it actually in the terms of service?
I need to confirm. Let me see if I can look this up earlier terms.
Because if it wasn't, that's pretty screwed up, right? You just like randomly trying to sell your wizard. I thought there was some way you
could have figured it out in the smart contract, but you have to be more like.
Yeah, I think that's rude. Then that's not cool, right? You can't expect someone to dig through the smart contract and when they're just trying to sell their NFT. The other question I have for you, Carly, is like, if this gets burned, does your wizard just like turn into a skull, or do you get airdropped a skull? And like, what happens to your actual wizard itself?
Ooh, I think you get. I don't know the answer to that one either. I'll dig and find that out and find out the terms of service question, and we can like put it in the show notes or something for.
Yeah, because I was trying to find the skulls on the Wizards collection. I was like, oh well, clearly they're going to be listed for next to nothing, but I don't see any skulls in the Wizards collection.
I can say with Peacefall, when your character dies after a competition, the metadata is updated, and you don't have to get a new NFT. Like, your character is now dead. With that said, I think there are airdrops that you will get outside of that, but you essentially have a dead character at that point.
Gotcha.
I'm trying to see if I can see it here real fast. Because you're right, I haven't seen any of the skulls. I just saw that was like what you got in lieu of your wizard, and that we don't know what they're going to be used for yet.
I don't know that I love the wizard
real fast on here.
art. I'm not a huge fan. Some of these guys look a little weird, but I said the same thing about Ape, sadly, and missed the whole boat because of that.
I'm kind of with you, Kevin. I kind of think this is hilarious as well, and I guess I feel bad for folks who lost out on this, but it was a free mint, and it's sort of like all's fair in love in the blockchain. I think Zeneca said to me the other day, which I feel like we're in the Wild West here. So I honestly, to the point you were making, Derek, like, I'm so excited about this as part of this, I think, macro picture we're going to see of NFTs just upping the ante in terms of how we engage with all sorts of different kinds of content. So the first thing that I thought of when I saw this was I was in Mexico City a couple of weeks ago, and do any of y'all know what the second most popular sport in Mexico is next to soccer?
Do not.
Is it basketball?
It is lucha libre. It's their like WWE, basically. It's wrestling. Right. And this is a sport that's international, but one of the things that makes it really unique in Mexico is they have masks. This is my understanding.
I love those
they were
masks.
Telling this, these masks. And so they have these characters that are hugely instrumental, just like in WWE, to the storyline of these fights and whatever. But a lot of these fighters are anonymous, and they don't actually know who they are in real life because they have these masks, and the masks are part of their characters. And they have these things called mask fights, where the goal is to unmask your opponent. And if your opponent gets unmasked, it's like the ultimate humiliation. And in some cases, truly, like, their careers are over. They can never be that character again. So in some cases, the tour guide who was explaining this was like, if you're like really handsome and you're a good guy, sometimes it helps your career because now you like are a handsome good guy and you can kind of resurrect your career that way. But like, you can't be that character anymore. And so this is what I was sort of thinking of with Wizards, is like these battles to the death. And I think because anonymity is such a part of blockchain, I was like, G Money's Ape Punk going up against like Punk 6529 and the smart contract are their real identities. And like the winner, like their identity gets revealed in the smart contract trigger. Like, obviously we won't really see those two or that, but like, I just think there's so many fun ways that these games are going to get that much more intense and like real with NFTs. And much like you were saying, Derek.
Yeah, the question I have for you though is, getting back to the collectability aspect, like in some sense, this is high stakes gambling, or, it's like you're dealing with a really valuable NFT and you put it up for war and it may turn into something else. And I wonder if this doesn't, I guess that it can be a subset of what NFTs eventually represent? Like, we know now that NFTs are going to be many things, right? They're going to be utility, they're going to be access to certain things, they're going to be concert tickets, whatever, right? This to me doesn't feel like, well, it is art in a way, but is this something where we'll have our wizard up on the wall 2 decades from now and it'll be a collectible because of the art? Or will it have to be something that is maintained as a game to be relevant? Do you see what I'm saying?
I totally see what you're saying. Well, let me not answer that by saying this, which is I think there's a reason that we're seeing art blocks and punks do really well during this bear market, right? It's the like Buffett expression, when the tide goes out, you see who's swimming naked. And the flip side of that is you see where people really have conviction. And clearly there's a like IRL, or there's an analog. We've got historical comparisons to make for art blocks. Like I can make a very compelling case to my dad, right? That, hey, generative art is a new art form that is only going to rise in prominence as people understand it better and our lives get more digital. And this is going to be fine art. These early artists are like your Picassos, and so it'll be worth something in 50 years. And he can like fully understand that because there are these real world analogs to it. Clearly, there are not real world analogs for like even Bored Ape Yacht Club, call it, or something like Wizards, like some little gaming mechanic going for hundreds of thousands of dollars down the line. So do I think Wizards is something where it's going to have like tremendous future value, or people are going to hang it on their wall as art? I don't know. I guess some people might want it as art, but like, no. And you could say that's why I haven't bought into it, even though I've conceptually found it to be a really interesting project. Does that count as an answer?
I love where you're going with this. Cause it's like, the way I think about it is like these blockchains are just databases. They're just a place for us to record information. That information happens to be financial, but it can be all types of different information. And just because like some use cases for that database are things that I want to store wealth in or store value in, so like art blocks or CryptoPunks or autoglyphs or things like this, doesn't mean that same database is going to be used for other things that I want to store wealth in. So when I think about like these characters in this game that are essentially like sudden death, and I lose like, they lose value immediately if I lose the game that is being played. I know playing that game, like the expected value of this thing, there's some probability, some non-zero probability that these things will be zero one day. And so I'm not going to store massive amounts of wealth inside of these things, but should they deserve to exist because it pushes the space forward and shows us what's possible in like these high stakes, hardcore mode games where everything is on the line, and maybe 5-10 years from now, there's a whole industry that's built around high stakes blockchain based gaming. I love it. Like we should be pushing the industry forward in these crazy directions, even if they're not things that we want to store wealth in.
Well, and the flip side to what you just said, Derek, is like, yeah, maybe this thing can lose all its value, but if I'm consistently winning, if I'm playing in these tournaments and it's a permadeath or like a death-like situation, the winning one is going to get a lot of value. And I don't come from a gaming background at all, but it strikes me that there will be some of these that will emerge that'll have tremendous value as a gaming collectible because, the top gamer's, character that he actually owns now in a way he can't in insert game today will be tremendously valuable and a huge collectible in the future.
Yeah, I think and Carly, like I guess we do have some analogs to this in that, when a game becomes a part of your life that eventually a decade later or 2 decades later it becomes nostalgic, then there is a draw to hold or own. You have more net worth at that point as an individual. And, we've seen this time and time again, like, Pikachu playing cards or Magic the Gathering, like these can sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars because there is that nostalgic component that comes in. And then you go back and say, well, I got to have a piece of my childhood again. Like sitting to my right are 10 Wolverine #1 comic books in my closet here. And, they're $100 a piece, but I love Wolverine, and that was the comic I could never afford as a little kid. And so I ended up buying them and collecting them later. And that's real. So that could happen here as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it feels like, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but it feels like it's already clear that art blocks and punks will be those legacy artworks that appreciate and value. And I don't think it's clear which games will be the the nostalgic games that in the future people will want to collect. And maybe that's the difference. And that's where I feel like we don't have the analog
It's a really
yet.
great question. And the other thing too, just to kind of like tease out what is a game? Like, I think the aperture for like this idea of a game has really changed with PFPs. Like this idea that there are like these collectibles and there are these storytellers that are building out these universes and these IPs in real time. And these are very much like game-like qualities in terms of capturing attention. And so like the games that we played in front of with a console and in front of a television in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, like those were ways that like games were developed in the past. But what we're seeing with things like, this project or Peacefall or some of these other like PFP projects, like we're seeing this idea of like what it actually means to create a game or a compelling experience that captures attention. It's starting to look a lot different. And so the games that resonate with this, like this next generation, may actually not follow those same design principles as other games in the past.
I think that's right on. And I talked to Justin Hulog, who's the head of gaming studios at Immutable X. And one of the things he's pointed out, I think he spent many years living in Singapore, is he's like, there's also a huge difference between like Western/United States gaming market and like the international gaming market. And mobile gaming makes up and China, like make up a huge percent of the global gaming industry. He's like, when you look at gaming or play to earn or whatever, only in the context of like a Western market, and you're thinking of like Legends of Zelda, and you're like, that doesn't feel like necessarily easily applicable for like having blockchain components to it, or doesn't have that kind of like blockchain economy mechanism built in. Like that's actually a small percentage of what the global gaming market is. I think there's all sorts of ways that we need to broaden our thinking about what is gaming as we like enter this new era.
There's so many things that are going to become. Well, I'm really curious over the next couple of decades or just the next handful of years. That I always think about the traditional art world and what are these moments that occur in these collectibles or in these artists' lives that increase value in these objects. And like for a collectible card, it could be Steph Curry winning another title, right? Like that'll shoot up their rookie card price goes up because now they're cemented even more in the Hall of Fame and who they are as an individual. For artists, it can be launching a really new, interesting novel collection and making sure that they don't launch too much art so they're not flooding the market, right? There's that balance. And the one thing we haven't seen, and this is super morbid, but I had to bring it up, like no artists have died yet that are like digital first artists. Like what happens then? We've never seen that, but that is a big moment that happens in the traditional art world when an artist passes away and they're a well-known artist. It tends to skyrocket their prices. Sorry for being so morbid on a Friday.
No, Eric Cauldron, Snowfro, founder of Art Blocks, actually made a really interesting point about like artists could create something where in the smart contract it's locked up until they die, and like there's interesting ways that I don't know what happens in that scenario, but he said the same thing. He's like, sorry this is morbid, but like that's it. Maybe he said it on your show, Kevin. Did you say it on Proof?
Is my crummy squiggle gonna get wings at some point? Like what are you telling me?
Yeah, I don't know, but he's played around with that. I know, like his early introduction to smart contracts was like locking up Ethereum that would unlock on his friend's daughter's like 18th birthday.
Yes,
that's when she was born. So he plays with that concept of the smart contract, letting you play with time as an artist in a way that I think is really interesting.
Yeah, that's super cool. It's twisted and cool at the same time.
Time is maybe one of my favorite unexplored vectors with this technology. Like we have this database that tells us like the time that assets are held or transferred or whatever it may be. Kevin started to play with this with nesting, which I loved. Just like this idea of like time-weighted rewards, as long like that proved like that demonstrable attention and affiliation back to the project. This idea of like time as a vector of exploration, I think is so interesting and so underserved. So I'm really excited to see more experiences around it.
Yeah, that was totally an unlock for me when I heard Kevin on like a Twitter space first talking about nesting and being like, why should I as a Bored Ape holder get the same benefits as an older Bored Ape holder, when I bought it yesterday? Like, oh, of course, if what we're all about in this space is like community, we're going about it wrong.
Yeah, who really inspired me was Def Beef. When he made
Def Beef is the best.
Yeah, I mean, he made that piece of art that, it was audio and it degrades every time it transfers to a different wallet. So the audio quality actually goes down. So it's almost like an old vinyl record. The more it gets played, in this case, the more it changes hands, the worse the quality gets. And of course, you can go back to the contract and get the original and, figure out how it sounded. But that's not the point. It was just like a beautiful little mechanic that I was immediately drawn to.
I have one final case I want to put forth in this, like NFTs up the ante and they're changing the way we consume media, and Wizards is at the forefront of that, which is a company called Feature.io. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Feature. Kevin, I may have mentioned them to you at some point because I think they're doing a number of interesting things. First, they're probably best known for they created the marketplace that Coinbase used to cast the Bored Apes in their like trilogy series. So they're doing some fun things with like NFT licensing stuff. But they announced, I think at NFT NYC, that they're in the process of, or they've built like the first streaming device for Web3. So putting your NFTs like on your TV. But the broader vision here is like, oh, you're watching sports car racing on maybe it's a scripted show or whatever, right? And you have your NFTs and, oh, the car on the TV loses and, oh, you've lost your NFT has gotten burned, or it's appreciated in value. So I think you said this earlier, Kevin, it is in some ways just really glorified gambling. But in this world of like, we need things more violent, more sexual, like more whatever to keep us entertained, this feels like something that I could really see taking off in the future of when we have NFTs that are tied to the shows that we're watching and the stakes just feel higher for us as we're watching them. So I think they're doing some really interesting things, building hardware and pushing things forward on that front.
Oh man, that's going to be crazy. So you're like saying there's going to be a way for my NFTs to interact with like your favorite Netflix show or something like...
Yeah, like Game of Thrones, like, oh, like, we've all just gotten wrecked and all of our NFTs were burned because the characters, like, I don't know, but I could see that feature. Like, I'm really interested in how content is becoming more multimedia, like across different channels as we all become more on our phones.
Carly, that is so freaking cool. Imagine, okay, let's just like, for the sake of brainstorming, imagine, you don't know what the script looks like for Game of Thrones, okay? It's season 1, and the characters get released as NFTs. And in some sense, you're like, okay, well, someone is going to be, get the throne at the end of this. Like, where am I placing my bets? And like, and then different, like someone's arm gets chopped off and then like your NFT updates and it has a missing arm, right? Like you're like, oh shit, should I sell this one now? Like it would be really awesome to like go on that adventure and trade those and hold those. That would be so cool.
Well, and you almost talked about it. You're talking about like Steph Curry put up a 3-point, whatever, like Steph Curry wins something, does something really cool. Your Steph Curry, tradable, collectible NFT will go up in value. We just haven't seen that happen. We haven't really had the mechanisms for that to happen in like movie land in the same way, or TV
It's so
land.
interesting to think about it that way. I think the Steph Curry example is a great one. I remember early Top Shot, and I think this is still the case. So this was back in mid 2020 when the product was still in beta. And then when it moved out of it, players would have a good game. So like Steph Curry would hit 60 points and hit a buzzer beater. And during that game, as he was playing, when it was clear that he was breaking out and becoming the star of the game, I would look on Top Shot and the cards that were associated with Steph Curry were starting to trade up in value. So it was like a real-time stock market had created for a single player based on his collectible value. I think that was a really big unlock for me a few years ago, like this real-time dynamic nature of media informing price. And so I think, to your point, Carly, and yours too, Kevin, that intersection of AR, of VR, of television, of media creation, of digital ownership, of being able to price these things, having all of this information live on these ledgers, like these things are going to configure in some really interesting ways. And I feel like we're not even out of the parking lot of the first inning of a huge baseball game that's about to get played.
I totally agree. And as somebody who likes sports, but like is much more a movie, TV, like I'm not like a sports bettor or whatever. Like this excites me because I'm like, all right, this is an arena I can get in, like I'll start playing in this arena.
What is up with, switching topics slightly, what is up with ENS domain names pumping so hard? I know that was
you
one of
want
our
to take this, Derek? You want me to give? I can give some thoughts on this.
Why don't you give us some context, Carly?
So this caught my attention in some ways when porno.eth sold for sold for 200 ETH or 180 ETH. It was like $200,000. And then the other thing that was happening is like the second highest, most expensive domain name to sell, I think, is 000.eth. And then like 003.eth sold for a bunch. I was like, what is going on here? So it seems like the origin of this is 3-digit license plate numbers, or like short license plate numbers, go for a lot of money, especially in I was reading this like in Dubai. And so people started to kind of basically speculate on the idea that as more mainstream folks get into Ethereum and ETH domain names fulfill their ultimate potential, or, you know, whatever the case is, that these like short digits are going to be really popular and worth a lot of money. I will say I'm very skeptical of this narrative, and I'm looking at the money people are spending on some of these like 3-digit things, and I'm like, go buy Nike.eth. Like, what are you doing buying these like 003.eth numbers? But that's the story, and it's like one of the, you know, collections that's doing the best right now, and it's always on like the top 10 in volume, and it's interesting.
Yeah, we at the fund, we invested in a project called Rainbow Wallet a few years ago, and Mike Damaris, who's one of the 3 co-founders of that project, is the one was the one that kind of got me into ENS and thinking more about ENS as a collectible. What Mike used to do, and I think he may still do this, he was a very early adopter of that product, the ENS, and registering names. He must have registered hundreds, if not thousands of these, but like found celebrity names, the .eth celebrity names, and then would find a way to give it to them, and as a way to like red pill them into the Ethereum ecosystem. He was like the good steward of the ENS ecosystem, and anyway, I know he's done quite well. I'll say, more recently, one of the things outside of like the 3-digit ENS names has been this thing called the 10K Club. So as the meme of like the 10,000 PFP project like really started to take hold over the last year, I think what we saw was in the ENS ecosystem, so this was in spring, so like March, April, folks started feverishly buying numbers 0 to 10,000, and as a way to like speculate on this idea of like these 10,000 digit ENS names, and these names are now quite valuable. So if you belong to the 10,000 ENS club, 10,000 ENS club, I think I can't remember what the floor is now, but I think it's quite high at this point. So people are speculating in these different weird categories within the ENS ecosystem, hoping that in the future these things will be markers of value. I'm a bit more skeptical on things like this, but people will do what they think is the best way to create value with the ETH that they have, and this seems to be one of them that's really starting to take hold in the ecosystem.
I own 2 ENS names. Do you all? I mean, they're all very relevant to me. I mean, I just have kevinrose.eth and krovault.eth where I have all my secure stuff. Do you all have more than that? Do you have any like vanity ones?
I do. I actually registered a bunch that I let expire because I just like lost attention. So I did like the 1 year or the 2 year way back when. So I've actually lost some really great ENS names. I still have, I think I did like the 5 year or more for the ones that are like related to my identity. But yeah, I still have a couple 3-digit and 5-digit ones.
I have cryptocarly.eth, and I've debated pulling the trigger on so many others over X number of months. I mean, my like handles and all socials are Carly P. Riley, and I didn't ever buy Carly P. Riley, kind of thinking like it would be available for a while. And I guess because I have any sort of presence now, somebody has bought that one up. So I just checked for it the other day, and I was like, damn, I can't even have my name anymore. I think there's a really logical case around ENS domain names and squatting on them, and you know, again, speaking of real world analogs, like obviously these companies will pay a ton of money for their .com domain name. And so I think as brands enter the space, there's good reasons Advil's going to want advil.eth or whatever. And there's definitely a social signaling component to this, like most things in this space. But I don't think the 3-digit thing, that's I'm staking my bet that that's not the thing that in 10 years is going to matter. Like if you're at Carly on Twitter, that's obviously cool because people get that immediately. This like 3-digit thing strikes me as something that like us within the crypto community understand to be cool. But if we're looking over a 10-year time horizon when in theory everything's gone mainstream, like the world at large doesn't understand why it's cool. And so this feels like you're just really speculative that only for people who are spending a bunch of money on it. Now, obviously you got 000 at whatever, whatever you paid for it, even $100, like, okay, whatever. But these people who are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on it, I'm like, that's speculative on top of being speculative, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm avoiding it altogether. I just don't see, like you, like, I mean, .com domain names, like there's obviously some very valuable ones, but like, are the numbers that valuable? Like I kind of.
I looked up 000 on like Twitter and Instagram and tried to send it an email, and it doesn't exist on any of these other platforms because like nobody cares.
I think like the big takeaway I tend to agree with both of you guys. This is like less interesting to me as like collectibles than other areas of the space. With that said, like seeing this just really drives home the point that like, if it can be digital, it will be digital. And if it will be digital, there will be value that's like baked into this thing. And like, this is just, this is one of a gajillion things that is going to be digitized over, the course of humanity. And we're seeing a lot of people want the ability to own that thing, this digital object. And my view is that like, that doesn't necessarily something that will like bake in a ton of value over the next couple of years. But I think it proves the point that like when these things are digital and living on this ledger and can be priced to a global audience, like people will find ways to speculate on the most random things.
How many other extensions do you all own personally? For me, I have kevinrose.sol for Solana stuff, and then .tez as well for my Tezos related stuff. How about you two?
I'm on Sol and Tezos quite a bit, and I've still never registered a name just because that's not that interesting to me.
I haven't
It's
either.
just an easier way to find my wallet address because I forget my Tezos wallet address, and I'm just like, what was it? I'm not going to remember that. So I just like, oh yeah, kevinrose.tez. So it's easy.
Tezos is really hard in New York. It's actually weird. New York State has like weird restrictions on being able to get Tezos. So I'm like,
is it Tezos or Tezos?
Tezos. I don't know. GIF.
Yeah, there you go.
The last thing I'll say on the ENS front, I don't know if y'all are tracking any of the like, subdomains. So the example here is Carlini talked about this quite a bit I had him on the show at one point.
The PCC?
Yes. So Carlini created Penelope's Country Club. He registered the subdomain .pcc.eth. And so like everybody who has a Penelope's Country Club, they have one of the NFTs, they can go and get themselves a .pcc.eth domain name, and then they make that their domain name on Twitter. Again, that additional level of social signaling, though Carlini would argue there's also this utility for him where when he does giveaways on Twitter or something, if he sees somebody wins that has that .pcc.eth domain name, like he'll just send it to that address. And if they were lying about it on Twitter, then like, well, they're shit out of luck, essentially. He really thinks that this is like, that Bored Ape should be doing this. Everybody should be putting the .basie.eth in their Twitter handle, and that this just unlocks another level of social signaling. Any thoughts on that? I'm not sure how I land on it.
I like it. I think like these are just like to your point, Carly, like these are markers for social signaling, just like making your PFP a Penelope Country Club or a Bored Ape or a Meebit or a Moonbird. Like having a .eth name or .tez name or a .sol name as your name in your bio I think achieves the same thing. It says who you are, presents your identity, it shows who you are to the world. And it allows, there's some really cool gamification that projects who want to support that and move in that direction can do, and to incentivize people to like build community in that way. So I'm a fan. I'm a fan of that area of exploration. I will say like where I draw the line is, I think that kind of stuff is amazing and awesome, and we're going to see more of it. But I also want to like couch listeners that things like this may not be the best place to speculate on future value. Just because it's like these are very commodified features, and I'm not totally sold that some of these things are going to be quite valuable in as time goes on.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one for sure. Awesome. Well, let's jump into the next story. Who wants to take the next one?
Should we talk about fashion NFTs?
Yeah, tell us about fashion NFTs, Derek.
Yeah, so a couple actually big pieces of news in fashion NFTs this week. The first is G Money, who we had on the roundtable, announced the launch of his new fashion label called 9DCC. It's the last four digits of his of the company Ethereum address. It's the first ever crypto native luxury house and lifestyle platform. And they're debuting their first product. It's called Iteration 01, which is a very high-end t-shirt only to members of the Admit One community. I think G has called it like the first networked asset. So like the first networked apparel asset. And so there's going to be a physical representation of the NFT that's tied to the actual digital NFT. He's playing with this idea of like this network and incentives around both of these things. And so that was the first piece of news, which we can kick the tires on. Second is 2 companies came out of stealth this week, one Tribute brand, the other Drop, to announce that they had received fundraising to build out these fashion NFT marketplaces or brands. My fund invested in one of them, and Flamingo invested in both, Tribute and Drop. So very excited to see the exploration of fashion and NFTs and Web3, because I think this is a vertical that I think people are sleeping on, and I think it's going to get
let's spell Drop for
here.
Folks. I'll play Kevin here and say it's not
Drop.
spelled the way you think it is.
It's spelled DRAUP, pronounced drop, but spelled, to Carly's point, with an AUP at the end.
So what
do you guys think? What do you guys think of fashion NFTs?
I want to learn more. I mean, Derek, when you think about just saying fashion NFTs, what does that mean? Is that a picture? Is that a wearable in a metaverse? Is it like what is this actually going to be?
Yeah, such a good question. So maybe the best way for me to like explain my conviction in this category is to start from like PFPs. I think is a great example. So like, what do PFPs do? They allow you to present your identity in a way that's like suited to who you are in digital form, right? So much like we present ourselves physically. So like I'm wearing this shirt right now. Carly is wearing, is that orange or red? It's like
pink.
It's an orange or red.
Know.
It's a pink top. Kevin's got his cap on. Like these were all choices we made to present ourselves to the world today.
To be fair, I didn't know this was going to be a video podcast, so I was not consciously presenting myself to anyone but you two as this.
That is a good point. That is a good point. Okay.
So much better other than I'm just kidding.
Fair play. But I think the larger point I'm trying to make is like, these are all decisions that we make on a daily basis to present ourselves to the world. I think PFPs were the first time, or at least the first thing to have product market fit that allowed us to do this digitally. It said, this character with these traits, this hairstyle, this mohawk, these glasses, this top hat, this shirt, this chain, whatever it may be, this ape, this alien, these were things that allowed us to present ourselves in digital form. So I would argue that like PFPs and like the traits therein was like the first time we really saw fashion NFTs and this idea of like digital presentation of our identity through like these objects happen with blockchains. Now, it's unquestionable to me that like the more like as technology improves, as AR and VR and television and media and all these sorts of things start to converge together, the ability to improve the granularity by which we present ourselves digitally will only improve. So you can imagine where in 10 years we now have an avatar that we've created and we've designed ourselves, or maybe it's, one that we've bought from a PFP collection that we like and whose ideals and values we share along with the rest of the community. And we're able to parse down in granular form the types of things that we rig that asset with as we present ourselves socially or through work when we, are engaged in these experiences, or continuing through social applications like Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or whatever it may be, and being able to Web3 auth into these different social platforms or work platforms, or go on Zoom and be able to like have a conversation, but in digital form, with like the type of granularity where we're able to choose our shirt or our hat or whatever it may be. These are all just like, this is just digital fashion to me. And I think the granularity of digital fashion as technology improves across all of these sectors is going to allow us to have the ability to present ourselves in different ways. So that's kind of how I see digital fashion.
Here's my question on it, which you may or may not really be fair, but because this strikes me as a category, sort of like art, that I'm like, no brainer. Like clearly people have been buying skins in Fortnite and care about socially signaling digitally for a long time. So clearly there's going to be a market here. Now it's a little different because clothing in the real world, especially for women, like is sort of also about making you look a certain way, or like, at the end of the day, like attracting a mate or whatever. And that's a little bit less clearly the goal if you're talking about digital fashion, though there's still some of that at play. But my question is really, do we evaluate fashion in the digital space? If I'm looking to buy into these things the same way we're evaluating clothing and cool clothing in the real world, part of this question comes from, I know it's actually kind of complicated to get really realistic fabric looking, like movement of fabric, like digitally. And that technology has evolved on that, but like it can be very technically complicated, and it's impressive to get like really cool looking fabrics in a digital sense. So like, is that getting factored in at all as people are looking at what digital fashion pieces are worth, or is it strictly like, that looks dope or whatever?
I think we're going to see it all. So I think we're going to continue to see the proliferation of like skins, or like really cool shoes that you can buy in Fortnite, or really cool, just like very casual fashion stuff that like projects are working on. Like whether it could be used in a gaming environment or it can be used on a Zoom screen. That isn't very complex. I think we're also going to see things like tribute brands, which is very much high-end fashion. Which is like serving a slightly different market. It's serving like this more, without giving away too much, but I think they understand like there are technical limitations to presenting digital fashion in AR, and you can check them out on Instagram. They have a pretty big following around some of like the AR-based fashion that they've created. They understand that there's some technical limitations to avatar wearables and wearing these things on avatars. So they're partnering with some of the best firms in the space to be able to like showcase digital fashion to the best of its ability based on the technology we have today. And we're also going to have Web3 based fashion that extends into the physical universe. So like what G Money's doing with this shirt, right? And being able to tie back ownership back into these NFT assets. I think the design space here is actually far reaching and it expands to everything. And I think we're now at the point where we have different teams that are starting to carve out these different niches around how fashion and NFTs are going to intersect with each other. And I think how people consume these different assets in these different sectors is really going to be segment driven. So the people that, engage with the physicals may not be the same audience that engage with like the pure AR based high end fashion or the pure or the pure virtual fashion. But I'll pause there and let you guys weigh in.
Yeah, I think you're right on it. For me, I believe for fashion in terms of it, for really to take off, there has to be a supporting world. Yes, we can look at, so I'm talking about into just a pure digital sense. Like if it's just going to exist digitally, there has to be some way to utilize it, right? To use it other than just looking at it. If that can bridge to a physical piece, then that's not necessarily the case for me. Like for example, like if I could go get my artifact sneakers, and I own those and I'm the only one that can get those made, like that's amazing. And I think about that as applied to so many different things that we've already seen. I'm not sure how those nouns classes were sold, but were they sold as NFTs or no? Or are they just like you could buy them? Anyone could buy them?
I don't think they were sold as NFTs, but Carly, do you know off the top of your head?
I don't know.
Okay, well, I mean, this is an iconic, Gremplin created glasses for nouns. Everyone knows them that knows nouns. They went up and had them and did, from all appearances, quite a good job at manufacturing a high-end version of these glasses. They look beautiful and well put together. I see a world much like G Money does where, you'll come in, you'll hold that NFT and only you are allowed to go and actually request a physical be sent to you or purchase a physical. And they will have inherent value in your ability to physically mint these things, and they'll have a secondary market based on that, right? So if you want to actually have a pair of these glasses, you'd have to go and buy that NFT and then go and interact and purchase. So the purchasing can only be done via token gating, which is pretty interesting.
I've dabbled in this a little bit. There's a company called Cult and Rain that's doing this somewhat artifact model-y in the sense that it's sneakers. They're starting with sneakers, though I think they're expanding into like maybe varsity jackets or some other things. But they, so I bought some of their NFTs because I could redeem them for these like Italian-made physicals, and I was the only one who could get it, as the NFT holder, and just really high quality fashion. So that's sort of been my foray into trying to see what I think about all this, because I could very much see a world down the line where the metaverse is whatever the future of the metaverse is, and it being a piece of digital fashion is alone enough because you're wearing it out in your metaverse life. But I don't think we're really there yet. So for me, definitely it's more interesting or really only interesting for me right now when I can actually get a physical and like wear it on my feet and play around with it that way.
Yeah, I totally do agree with that. I am very excited to claim my new 90cc shirt when those launch. I'll also say, just to like play devil's advocate on like the utility factor of digital fashion, we've actually seen, and I suspect we've seen this like, let's take CryptoPunks and Larva Labs, or Tyler Hobbs and Fidenza, or Snowfro and Chromie Squiggle, or Dmitry Cherniak and Ringers. We've seen these artists develop around these sectors who have created art that has then built, like, for whatever reason, just based on the time or their ability or their innovation from a technical perspective, have become very collectible artists that people are now kind of speculating on their careers around.
Right.
We see it all the time with one-of-ones. So like Xcopy or POC or Fuocious or Grand Yoon, or a number of them who are creating work. I suspect the same thing will happen with high-end fashion, where we will see some of the top digital fashion designers in the world do a one-of-one fashion drop that can be rigged and worn on your avatar 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and derive significant utility. But by virtue of their craftsmanship or their work and the style and their attention to detail, or what they're saying in their ability to like create the work and in the artwork itself, people are going to realize that these are very collectible, even outside of that utility. Like, there is value to owning that one-of-one digital fashion piece, because now you're speculating, or at least supporting, this artist in their career over the next few decades. And what they created may inspire thousands or hundreds of thousands of other work in the future. And as we draw the line back in history, back through time to digital fashion's beginning, they will be deemed to be a significant part of that story being told. So I say there's also this argument to be made around what G Money's doing and what Tribute's doing, and what Drop's doing. I do suspect that some artists will develop on these ecosystems that become some of what like Snowfro has become for generative art, or what Larva Labs has become for generative art, or what, Xcopy has become for one-of-one art. What do you guys like? Does that resonate with you guys?
I love what you're saying, Derek. And I just have one question. What are you filling your bags with today then? Like, what are you buying that we don't know about?
So this is very, very early stuff. Like, so G Money's is really the first like one that I've seen that's really bridging this in a very interesting way. Tribute and Drop are both doing their drops later this year. I'm like paying a lot of attention to how these different segments get served and the types of work that gets generated on these platforms. My early thesis is, things like CryptoVoxel's wearables. So Kevin and I have riffed on this before, but there's this old 1155 contract that CryptoVoxels created for people to create wearables inside of the CryptoVoxels universe. They're like these 3D wearables. There's a number of really great artists, crypto artists, who tinkered around on that contract. So there's artists like Xcopy and Josie and A Lot of Money and Coldy. A number of like these early 2018 to 2020 artists who were playing around with creating these wearables that I think could end up becoming collector's items in the future. So it's always fun to go back in time and kind of go crate digging through some of those old wearables, because I do think that that's part of the fashion story. But I think, to Kevin's actual question, 99.99% of what I think this industry will become hasn't been created yet. And so it's all about keeping an eye on this vertical.
When you say G is sort of the first one doing this, what do you mean there? I know he's got this shirt that will be both a physical and a digital, but certainly that's not the first time we've seen physical digital in this space.
Yeah.
What is new there?
So I think the thing that's new there is there's actually a chip inside of the shirt that relates back to the digital.
I think he's working with IYK. I think the company doing the chip, which I'm good friends with that team, and they're doing some really cool stuff. Okay, that's
totally. And so in addition to it targeting this very high-end fashion segment, I just haven't seen anything else like what he's planning to do around this yet in the fashion world. So I think this will be a project to kind of keep an eye on, because I think it may end up setting some trends or some best practices around how this thing gets unfolded.
Maybe to explain that for folks, that there's going to be like a little chip in the shirt, or you can put these chips in a piece of clothing in a way that it looks like a design element, right? You could have fabric over it, and then you tap it with your phone and it'll pull up an NFT. So you can claim the NFT through the physical merch. And there's obviously some interesting applications for that.
Yeah, and I think it makes it so this is where like my information set kind of tapers off, but I think there's even some really cool stuff you can do outside of the claiming process once you're able to create that direct connection between NFT and apparel. And I think that's the kind of these are the kinds of experiments that I think haven't been borne out yet. And so one of the reasons why I'm excited about seeing how this experiment unfolds along with Tribute and Drop and some of these others.
Two questions for you all. One easy one. Do either of you own unisocks, and would you be a buyer? Because they were like the early. I kind of put them in the fashion bucket. It was
kind of in the fashion bucket. I don't own any unisocks. I could be a buyer. I haven't looked at that curve
because that's early
where things are at. That is very early. I was actually at the blockchain conference where Hayden announced unisocks. This was like, God, years ago, 2018 maybe, 2019. But he was on stage.
This is a Uniswap thing?
No.
Oh, it's not connected to Uniswap. I don't know Uniswap.
It is connected to Uniswap.
It's connected to Uniswap.
Oh, it is.
So Hayden, yeah. So Hayden from Uniswap created this bonding this physical digital pair on this bonding curve that allows you to redeem out the digital for the physical and burn your digital, or keep the digital on inside the curve. Exactly. And so there's been all this fun around the redemptions, the non-redemptions, especially as prices skyrocketed. I think at one point the socks were over 100K. Does that sound right to you, Kevin?
Yeah, that does. They're 29,000 for a pair of socks right now. There's 20 out of the 301 available. And 199
pretty wild.
Have been burned and redeemed.
Totally. These are the kind of experiments that people, we're going to be talking about unisocks 10 years from now. And I don't own any, and I may never own any, but I do think it's a fascinating fashion experiment.
Speaking of other people that are in this space and in fashion, I've heard of a couple of DAOs. Red DAO is probably the first DAO I heard of. Are either of you members of Red DAO? They focus on fashion.
Yeah, I'm in Red DAO.
I'm not in it, but I've been tracking it a bit because I think it's interesting. They're, pulling money to buy into any sort of specific asset class is an interesting concept to me. So,
are you all, Derek? Since you're in Red DAO and that DAO focuses on fashion, I noticed G's also in there as well. Are you? I noticed there's no public page around what you've purchased. Are you kind of sitting on the sidelines at this point? Like, is there any plans to announce what the DAO has been investing in?
Yeah, I think there will be at some point. But we've definitely been making investments, and actually Red DAO did invest in those three projects. Tribute Brand, which was announced this week, Drop, which was announced this week, and the G Money a bit one.
Very cool.
Do you have any theories around or preferences around investing in Web3 native digital fashion brands versus Gucci, Versace getting into fashion? Red DAO made some early purchases in, I feel like, some of those traditional brands, early NFTs like Gucci or Versace or one of them, right?
Yeah, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this too. Because I would say like I'm not totally, like my confidence level with like what I'm about to say isn't totally there. So I'm always like trying to like learn about this. I would say I think there's going to be value everywhere. I think the stuff that's always been interesting to me is like the bottoms up stuff. It's like why I think a lot of us got into this space. It's like PFPs weren't even a thing, and now it's, $18 billion industry. And so like these are the types of things that are like fascinating to me because they can get very big if you can like tweak the parameters correctly. And you don't really see that kind of risk taking top down. That said, I think there's going to definitely be value from like some of the large brands in the world that want to like tap into digital fashion. What I do think will happen when that happens is they're going to look to projects like G Money's Event One. They're going to look to projects like Tribute Brand. They're going to look to projects like Drop and find out what has been working on these platforms and these drops and these creators to really kind of sort through their own strategy. But I do think that at a certain point, there will be tremendous value there because they have the funnel, they have the audience, they have the eyeballs.
Yeah.
And probably acquiring those brands, right? Nike artifact style.
Yeah, exactly.
I have thoughts on this, but Kevin, I'd love to hear yours if you have any.
Yeah, I'll just go real quick. I mean, for me, I always cringe a bit when I see big brands doing things that just feel like PR moves. They'll do something, they'll launch something, and you'll be like, oh no, somebody at PR heard the word Web3 and you did something, right? So it's like, I'm a fan of, I think to play, I have no doubt, I'm with Derek in this camp. I think there's going to be value everywhere. And of course, some big brands will get it right, right? But I have a feeling in order for them to get it right, they're going to have an internal team or, I don't know, some set of some media agency or someone they work with that plays well in Web3, that does this the right way, that takes risks that they wouldn't normally take, that does more bottoms up kind of exploration here versus just being like, we're a big brand, we just sell you expensive NFT. Like that's not going to work. It has to be something a lot more fun to engage this audience. And so that's what I'm waiting for from these bigger fashion brands. It's not, I don't want to buy just some random Gucci NFT, right? Like it doesn't like, well, I'm not a Gucci like wearer, but like I feel like when the brand does, hopefully when these big brands do get involved, like Nike, I'd be all about, right? But it has to be done the right way. So, yeah, that's what I'm waiting for. I feel the same way about celebrities, by the way. I don't know if you all feel this way, but like when you see a big celebrity come into the space, but I love those celebrities and I want them to do well, but I just want them to do it in an authentic way versus just a cash grab way.
I was saying the other day, I'm like, I give credit to the celebrities that are entering in the bear market. I mean, I guess credit to you for choosing to enter now. Like you could have made a bunch of money last year, but so I'm going to take this moment I'm going to again kind of cheat in my answer because this actually ties pretty well to this macro thesis that I want to put forward and get y'all's reactions to that is more in like the Hollywood IP space. You could even argue maybe the celebrity space, but may have comparisons or maybe instructive for the fashion world too. And so this comes from my friend John Rogers, who's brilliant and folks should go check him out. He was the head of franchise for Disney for many years. So he worked under Bob Iger and was in charge of looking at like, okay, the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, how do we strategically monetize that and operate that as a franchise so we don't just burn it out, but that we can maybe revive it in 10 years, obviously maybe not anticipating Johnny Depp's career going the way that Johnny Depp's career went. So I really take his word. I think he's really smart about IP and this space. So he has this whole concept of like an architectural innovation. And he gives the examples in Hollywood of these moments when you've had these architectural innovation moments. And he talks about like in the 1970s, you got the summer blockbuster as a concept. And you have all these major studios who, prior to that, the way they would monetize is they would put out movies throughout the year and hope they made as much money as possible. And then I forget which studio it was, but one of them realized if they really invested more of their resources into having a huge movie in the summertime, they would make more money than like spreading those resources out on films throughout the year. And they had tapped into this consumer behavior that then ultimately fundamentally changed the way that studios monetize
I love where
themselves.
You're going with this. This is so cool.
And there's been a couple of these moments he'll point out. So like in the early 2000s, it was franchise IP. And Disney was like number 4 studio, whatever. I don't know these numbers perfectly right. But really catapulted themselves because Bob Iger made an investment in Pixar and Lucasfilm and said, hey, we're going to really double down on franchises as the way our business model works. And that's been incredibly successful for them. And obviously now all we see from movies are franchises. It's like the only thing that goes to the box office these days. And so John's theory is that NFTs and the blockchain represent another one of these architectural innovation moments. And the key is that the studios that will win have to really reorganize their business models and their hierarchies and their structures around understanding that this is the new way to monetize. And it gets into that multi-medium concept we were going at earlier, like NFTs on your phone, on your screen. And, you know, he was there and when Bob Iger did this at Disney, he's like, that was painful. That was a painful reorg. And these very legacy institutions don't want to do these painful reorgs for very obvious reasons. And so he's looking at this now being like, will any of the studios catch on to this in blockchain? Or is this really a moment for these incumbents to come up and potentially overtake some of these, you know, massive institutions because they're willing to and they get it. So I love that theory. Would love to hear y'all's reactions. And it gets me into thoughts I have on how some of these studios have entered the space up to this point, which I think has broadly been pretty terribly. But I think that it could be the same in the fashion world. I don't know what the analogies would be there, but like, it feels like there's the fashion brands that really get it and are willing to reorganize some things to really get it. may have a shot. Otherwise, you have these incumbents that may really be able to make a new name for themselves.
I would love to hear Kevin's thoughts on this.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me. It's part of the reason why we're moving to Los Angeles and basing our headquarters out there. I mean, I see the big media companies wanting to take a lot of risk here. And there are certain people that are playing in this world that are the heads of these organizations that see NFTs and say, you know, we've been selling culture forever. Like this is not new to us. We can sell culture. Let's do it in a way that we can make recurring revenue. Are you kidding me? Like we're in. Let's go. Right. So I'm seeing a lot of that attitude come out of LA. You know, I was very lucky to not name drop, but kind of name drop that you mentioned Bob Iger. I had a Zoom with him a couple weeks ago, and we were talking a lot about NFTs. You know, and he's very interested. He just left as CEO of Disney 4 months ago or so. But they're not sleeping on this. Like they're Disney and other media organizations are going all in.
Let me push back on that, maybe. Again, not having talked to Bob Iger, who I agree, I think gets this, and I've heard him talk on podcasts and things a little bit about this, and he seems to get it. And again, this is coming from John. He said this publicly, and I'm sort of parroting him, so I always want to give him credit because he's brilliant. But you know, what Disney's done so far in this space has mostly been licensing deals. They've worked with VV, and that their first drops of their characters have been not them personally publishing them. And it feels like a lot of these companies sort of get it. Like they get it, but they almost are seeing it more like, okay, we can make money. Maybe this is like merch. They're not seeing it as a totally new way to engage with content. And they're not really reorganizing their institutions or their structures around it. So they're making some senior hires, but then they're like, okay, we'll just go partner with Recur and like give you our best IP. And the truth is, it might be too early to be doing that because like Star Trek just did NFTs. Star Trek is such a God, you want to talk about one of the most iconic IPs of all time?
Yeah.
I don't know that they were actually ready to launch the first Star Trek IPs, and that they might be kind of burning their audiences on this, and they don't quite get it yet, and their audiences aren't quite ready for it yet.
Right.
So
no, that all makes sense to me. I think the only difference there is that it's like kind of what we mentioned earlier, where some brands are going to do it in an authentic way that is from a place of building in a native Web3 building way, and others are just going to be like, oh, this is the hot thing in the moment. Let me go out there and launch a bunch of Star Trek NFTs and just like totally miss the whole point of it all. Right? I think it's really going to vary brand to brand.
Yeah, I think we see this playing out with celebrities too, as you mentioned. Like in some ways, I feel like the celebrities that I see at least engaging the most with the space, call it like Hello Sunshine, Reese Witherspoon, they've been very involved, or seen Eva Longoria on a bunch of spaces. Like notably, they haven't dropped their own projects yet.
Right.
Because I think
Jimmy Fallon.
Jimmy Fallon, like I think they actually understand the space well enough to be like, you know what? Like it's maybe still a little early for my audience.
Yeah.
So like I'm going to be here and I'm going to hang out, but I'm going to wait for like the macro environment to really be right for me to jump in. And it's sort of these celebrities who I've been tracking Kevin Hart's drop, and I was in his Discord, and they're saying the right things. I think his intentions are there, but I think like his audience, I don't think is ready for this, And so
yeah, I mean, look at all the work Gary Vee had to do, right, to educate his audience before his drop. He did weeks or months of educational videos on how to use MetaMask and everything to try and bring his audience up to speed. One of the best emails I ever received, ever, was when Jimmy sent me a note and was like, I nested my moonbird, because he was asking how to do it. And he for some reason decided to spend a few hours on a Saturday, given how busy he is, and he figured out how to nest his moonbird. I'm like, that is legit.
That's sick.
I love that. That's somebody that really does not have the time to be working through MetaMask and everything, but he went and did it and signed the transactions and did everything. And I was like, man, that's awesome. That's like a true geek that is really going in and learning this stuff, and so I have no idea if he's working on anything, but I haven't heard anything yet, but when he does eventually do something in the space, it's going to come from that legit kind of point of view,
Yep. And I'll say on the Gary point, Gary's audience was already natively much more tech entrepreneurial, the kind of audience that would probably be inclined to be an early adopter of a technology, certainly more than Reese Witherspoon's fans are. And I say that as a very big Reese Witherspoon fan, so it's not a knock, but it's to say Gary had to do all that work, and he already had a more an audience more conducive to this space,
right?
I think what's so interesting, just listening to you both riff, is do you suspect that that poses a massive advantage for these bottom-up groups to reach escape velocity and build massive communities and build massive IP and build massive brands in a way that may turn into, over time, these giant Disney-like, entities or valuable properties, just given the fact that they're willing to, they're further out on the risk curve. They have an appetite for and a tolerance for that type of risk. And they're really leaning into these Web3 principles. That's my view. I tend to think that...
That's my view. Artifact should have sold for $1 billion. Like, what happened? They're way too early.
Yeah.
My sense is there will be value created top down and from like well-meaning, incumbent brands and personalities and IP. But man, I can't help but look at like the experimentation happening bottoms up right now and think that these aren't going to be the giants of tomorrow, because I think they will be.
I don't think they'll be the giants of tomorrow. They'll be the acquisition targets of tomorrow. They'll be the giants, but don't think that for a second like
That's
Disney,
true.
big media brands will come in and be like, there's $1 billion here, $1 billion there. They'll just pick up all the bigs.
It's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
And that's what I was saying with the fashion houses too. I was like, that's probably what happens there, is like these incumbent fashion players get bought up by your Versace's and Gucci's once they kind of pick their heads up on it all. What you're saying though, Derek, reminds me of this article I think I linked to, that somebody making the comparison between Despicable Me and then Disney's IP properties. Despicable Me is owned by Universal. And basically the premise of this article, which I found pretty compelling, was essentially like, when was the last time you went a few days without seeing a Mickey Mouse? Like, probably that happens all the time. Like, you don't necessarily see Mickey Mouse ubiquitously like out in the wild. And his point, maybe you've gone 3 days without seeing a Minion, but his point is Minions are everywhere. Like party balloon stores and like these like little Minion characters and memes on Facebook, like there's all over the place. And the argument here by this author is like Universal, which owns Despicable Me, like really is not heavy-handed in their enforcement of their copyright, whereas Disney is notoriously wildly heavy-handed in their enforcement of their copyright, and you can't use Disney IP in like anything. And I think that's the other reason that you're going to see these incumbent brands thrive, is because they get that, like, and you can debate CCO versus these hybrid models versus whatever, but like they get that the proliferation of their content in the hands of their fans doing things with it is cool and helpful to the brand. Obviously Disney's done pretty well, but they had an early mover advantage.
I would, so I'd love to hear Kevin respond to that and what he thinks. I have some thoughts as well.
As to which point?
To the point that it was Universal, you said, owns Minions, and they're very liberal with the use and permissiveness. At least with Minions, of their IP, which has led to this proliferation of the IP through memes, through balloons at the party store, through candles and posters and all sorts of things. Whereas Disney has always taken a more stronger approach to the use of that IP over time and over history, which has led to like this very high quality product and bar being associated, which allows them to, really own the experience, right? It's a trade-off for sure. But curious if there's any lessons here for us in Web3.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the jury's still out on this one in terms of I believe that there's no one model to fit everyone. 100%. It's like there are going to be, it's very interesting. The Bored Apes, what they did with freeing up each individual artwork and allowing people to go and build on top and build brands around that and own the commercial rights to that artwork. I think that's a solid move for almost any NFT project. That's what we do at Moonbirds as well. You protect the overarching trademark so that you don't have clones and other market confusion and all of that.
Protect the market.
Yeah. So you kind of protect that market, but you allow the individuals to go and monetize, which is huge. Then you've got Cryptodes. The best of both worlds. You got Cryptodes, you get all the other CC zeros out there, right? So, nouns, others, where there can be 1,000 different mix-ups of that. And, people can do whatever they want with it. And so far, we haven't seen a ton of bad actors in the space that I've seen. But, I worry about that. I worry that if something is completely free and open, there could be potentially groups that take it over and do horrible things with that brand. I don't know that there's any.
Jury's out.
Yeah,
jury's still out.
Well, I think a ton about CCO versus like a hybrid model, like a Bored Apes and what you do, Kevin, and then like a Gary Vee, who I think represents a little bit more like he's like, this is a collectible. I'm gonna make this really badass animated characters, and like you're gonna benefit from it for that reason. Derek, I think I saw you're a part of StoryDAO.
I am part of StoryDAO. Yeah.
I'm like a little skeptical. I'm a little skeptical on CC0, and I'm a little skeptical on this. Like, we're gonna create compelling stories as a collective that can rival your Star Warses, or like that some really big, important stories are going to come out of this. Do you feel differently, or are you a part of it because you're experimenting?
I do feel differently.
Okay.
Because I think what we've seen, I'll riff for a bit and we can tease out why. But I think what we've seen with PFPs, what we've seen with like community formation around these networked assets and NFTs is that like Bored Apes is going to be a massive part of Web3 IP in the future. Nouns is going to be a massive part of Web3 IP in the future. Moonbirds is going to be a massive part of Web3 IP in the future. And these were all started.
I made your list.
These were all started.
You've made it, Kevin.
These projects like these were all started organically through leaning into the principles of Web3. It was asset ownership. It was aligned incentives. It was programmatic revenues that could be verified on chain. It was bringing communities together. It was having it look much more like a flat organization around how communities could participate and have some economic ownership over the brand proliferating. Those principles, when you pair that, so like I think about how content was created for the last 100 years, and it was very much like top down. And like what this technology is really good at doing is it unbundles the way outputs get created and aligns incentives around it so you can rip out all of the fat or all of the stuff that no longer makes sense, given that we now have a paradigm where content can be created very quickly and reach a global audience in seconds. And so when you remove all of that fat, but you take those same ingredients to creating Star Wars or Star Trek or any other IP, and you create a system of incentives that allows, let's call it, Hollywood writers, producers, executives, artists, designers, creatives of all type, directors, and put them and create an organic structure that allows the community to also participate with them as the outputs get created at each step of the way, and aligns incentives in a way that's actually more equitable to the effort that's being made, where like maybe 90% of that value isn't extracted by some corporation or some production studio. I think what you'll find is that the same types of outputs, the same caliber of outputs can actually get created in a much more equitable fashion now that we're leaning into the principles of trust minimized technology and incentives and community formation. I think projects like Moonbirds, go ahead, Kevin.
I just want to play devil's advocate on one little point there, just out of curiosity.
Yes.
The thing, I love everything you say, and you say it so well. I might want to buy everything that you do. The thing that I'm having a hard time with is like, and we struggle with this because I want to take community input in everything that we do going forward. Like it's a big piece of what we try to solicit, what we try to pull up the best thinking of the organization, a very grassroots kind of bottoms up effort to help inform us moving forward. But I would say design by committee, in my experience, never really works.
Yes,
and
totally
I worry that when you put everyone on the same playing field, you end up with snakes on a plane, not Star Wars, right? Like we're
yes,
and
I totally agree.
So that's my
totally
concern.
No, I just will say I totally agree. I'm like shaking. I have like so many I'm like excited because I have so many thoughts on this, and I'm gonna try and not give them all. I can't even organize that. So keep talking, Derek. But I agree.
Yeah. I'll say one more thing just to respond to Kevin, and then I'd love to hear Carly you riff on this. I guess what I'm saying is I'm not saying that everything needs to be completely equal. Like I think that's never been the goal. I've never thought that the PA on set should be making as much money as the director or the creative or the writer or one of the actors. And I'm not saying that the extra who only has one scene should be making as much as, the script writer. What I am saying is that there's a lot of fat in these systems just as a byproduct of like how legacy outputs have been created over the last 100 years. And we now have the opportunity to reorganize the inputs in ways that are actually more conducive to like representing, like being able to flow back the right type of benefits to the right types of creatives based on the level of like what their participation is. Now, I'm not saying that like a totally equal DAO where everyone's treated equally and we're all sitting around the table singing Kumbaya and working together to create something is the best or most efficient way to do that. But what I am saying is that blockchains are really good for a lot of things. They're really good for tracking time. They're really good for tracking value. They're really good for aligning incentives programmatically. And so there are ways to take the same types of inputs, reconfigure them using these primitives to create the same type of outputs. And I believe it's projects like StoryDAO that are going to create the technological underpinnings for these formats for these types of outputs to get created in the future. But I'm going to step down.
Thought.
So Carly, I'd love you to riff for a bit.
I mean, agreed. It sounds so beautiful. So let me ask you, like, practically, tactically, what are the contributions that you see the broader community making? I don't say that because I don't think they contribute in all sorts of ways. Fandom is itself a huge contribution. I have thoughts around how you can, reward fandom in and of itself, but like in the creative process and these steps along the way that you described, like, what are people doing?
So I'll tell you the far end of the extreme, which is the one that exists today. Like right now, fans are treated purely as consumers. Mm-hmm. They're created purely as people who buy things, and they're not honored with the respect of often what they are, which is like creative collaborators as stories evolve over time. So like, take Star Wars, for example, and like the amount of fan fiction and the amount of participation that has been given by the community back to Star Wars, only for Star Wars never to honor that contribution and treat them as just like, people to buy the next thing, is I think a backwards way of thinking about what that collaboration can empower and also can be rewarded by. And so that's the far end of the extreme. That's the extreme that exists today, where if I'm a fan, the only thing that I can do to express fandom is to consume. Now, I think there's actually a better model that exists where it's not just consuming, but it's collaborating and being rewarded for that collaboration based on my passion and interest for IP. It's like, and we're seeing this with, PFPs right now, which is this idea that like it's still crude, it's still very early, but there are ways to align incentives between fans and creators in a way that feels much more equitable to where we're going and how things will get created in the future than what has existed over the last 100 years. So I guess what I'm saying is, it's not so much like we just flip a switch, everything's a DAO and these things will be good and that like everyone wins and it's kumbaya. But what I am saying is I can tell you for certain that this model is going to get sorted over time. And it's the experiments that are being run that are configuring these things in really interesting ways and really leaning into these principles and primitives and organizing them in a way that actually aligns incentives that are going to create some very big outcomes, if that makes sense.
I'll try not to go on about it so long, but I have like 3 specific examples I would like to throw out that I'd like to say are like the things that I think are interesting, but that to me offer a ton of potential, but fall short of this. And maybe I'm being too utopian about what I think your final vision is, but they fall short of this final vision of just like pure collaboration. So first it would be Deadheads, I think, has a really interesting model. Kevin, I think we may have talked about this before. I don't know, Derek, are you familiar with the Deadheads model of the Deadheads project?
I'm not.
Okay. I love getting to call out Deadheads because I think they're doing something really cool. Deadheads is very upfront. We're an animated studio. We're creating content. They've already created shorts on YouTube that are, I think, really solid. And all of the characters are owned by their holders. And what you can do is you can sort of stake your character right into a casting pool. And then if they cast your character in their show, you get licensing back. And they like to give the example of like, if you owned R2-D2 early on and now you could get royalties on R2-D2's use. I think that's a really cool potential way for fans to be involved where like the expectation is not that they're involved in the creative and the storytelling, because I think there's a really strong case to be made for a central vision around story, but they are reaping the rewards for being fans. The second thing I've heard about that I find interesting, and I don't know if it actually can work, Derek, you would know better than I would, is again, NFTs as licenses where right now, if you're a big franchise, you don't want to license your IP to small creators, to these fan fiction creators, because it's not worth your time to go and try and track down the royalties you're owed or enforce, something if they break the contract. Like you're not going to write out thousands of little contracts to all of your little fans. But if NFTs could be a way to do that, where if I'm a fan fiction writer, I could monetize my work and there's a smart contract that's making sure George Lucas gets paid a royalty for me using his work, That's really cool. And that feels like a way to start to monetize fan fiction. Again, that has nothing to do with them participating in the central creative vision of Star. Like George can still go create Star Wars, and he gets even richer now because all his fans that are creating things pay him royalties back, and they get rich off that fan fiction. I think that's interesting. And the final is Storyverse, which is a project by Justin Waldron. He's one of the co-founders of Zynga, and he's doing an interesting thing where it's like it's sort of like a choose your own ending, right? But you can create. He's creating the like gaming underlying platform to create your own stories. You can upload your NFTs. I can upload my Doodle and my Bored Ape and my whatever, and create stories with them using their like gaming infrastructure that then can get upvoted or downvoted by those various communities and become a part of like the core canon of Doodles or the core canon of Bored Apes from a community level perspective. Okay. Hopefully that wasn't too much too fast. But like those are three things. Go ahead, Kev.
I'm looking at Storyverse right now. It looks ridiculous. This is crazy. It's Storyverse.xyz, is that right?
Yeah. Storyverse.xyz.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It's interesting. And I think, they're doing it like, I don't know if it's changed, but when I was last talked to them, they're doing it like land. It's like plots of Storyverse land. So you can go and like explore the universe and like, go track this story happening over here in this part of the land. Anyhow, all three of those, I think, are really cool ways to reward fans for the critical role they play in IP without sort of being like, okay, we all tell the story together. Because I don't think Star Wars gets built if George has a committee around him and everybody gets a say. And frankly, even everybody gets like a cut. Like there is like,
yes.
George is like, I've got a vision. I want to make the money.
Yes.
Your reaction?
My reaction is I think you're right. I think those are all amazing experiments that are going to be run to help build and proliferate these stories over time. I think the distinction you're making is like, those are not core canon. And core canon should always be written by the experts. To which my response is like, I think that's probably true. Like we should have the experts.
So StoryDAO isn't pushing against that per se.
No, StoryDAO is saying the contributors of how stories get created, and certainly like, could there have been improvements to Star Wars based on fan contribution? I think that's probably correct. I think the answer is yes, especially if we look back at what like episode 1, 2, and 3 ended up looking like. So if fans had some control over how that script was written, I mean, I don't know if you guys are huge Star Wars 1, 2, or 3 fans, but like my sense is the fans were largely disappointed with how those three outputs were created. Right. Do I envision a world where the fans knew better than George, or at least could have informed the direction of those three and how they were produced in a way that created a better output? Unquestionably. I think those stories would have been much better if George had taken the centralized reign off a bit and really leaned into the fans of like how this thing could actually get told in a way that was conducive to the story that has been beloved and supported by fans for the previous 2 decades. He didn't do that. And so there is centralization risk when that happens. And all I'm articulating is that I actually think there's an improved way by which stories can get created in the future that leans into the principles of Web3 and allows creators of any kind, whether it's design or writing or art or producers or directors, to be able to leverage all sorts of different people in this ecosystem and incentivize the right types of contribution to make it into the final output. And I think that's what StoryDAO will unlock.
My belief is that if we get the tooling right, where the contribution can, 100x, because right now it's there's a very, very strict way that you actually can produce anything, any major film or anything like that, right? It's like there are gatekeepers in place to prevent the masses from contributing. If that happens, then you almost have that infinite monkey theorem thing happening, right? Well, infinite number of monkeys typing on a keyboard will eventually produce Shakespeare, right? So it's like something good is going to happen when you get that many people all trying to produce something awesome, right? Like there will be a breakout at some point. You just need the tooling and the platform and everything to exist to make it efficient and transparent and assign the correct roles to people. So I'm bullish. I just don't think we're there yet. In terms of
you need
tooling. The
right incentives.
Yes.
Because my question is like the idea with CCO or like blip maps is like, okay, the next, whatever, Beethoven is going to come along and create something for blip maps. And I'm like, why would he want to do it with a CCO property? Exactly. Like if he's the next Beethoven, like he's going and making his, I'm mixing my metaphors here because I'm talking about a musician and we're talking about story, but you get
your
the point.
point is a really good one, Carly. It's like the incentives really for this technology to really work at its like highest capacity. The incentives have to be perfectly tailored to like these outcomes, and without that, we're going to see things like blip maps or other projects just like fall by the wayside because those incentives aren't correct.
But I think when we get that piece right, it's most likely going to be the unknowns, the up and coming people that shine here. They create kind of like with everything else with Web3. It'll be that grassroots, like unknown name that this is their default way to go build because they don't know the other way, the other method, and they get involved and they create something amazing. Like to get J.J. Abrams to jump into Web3 and build in this new way, that dude doesn't need to do anything in Web3. He can just go work with his existing crew and make a shit ton of money, right? So like, I think it's not going to be the big household names that we see embracing a new way. It'll probably be a new bottoms up, star that rises.
My only counter to what what you're saying there, Kevin, is, and this maybe takes us out of just IP world, but like I interviewed Justin Kan, for example, who was the founder of Twitch, and he was we were kind of riffing on if Twitch had been decentralized out the gate. And it was like, well, if Twitch had been token run, say, and decentralized out the gate, like it wouldn't have sold for $1 billion, right? Like certainly not in the traditional sense. But Justin now has his money, is like, I sense a really good dude who like wants to help the world. Him now with his money might be willing to go build the next decentralized future because he doesn't need his $1 billion exit anymore because he's had it. And there's a theory that may or may not play out of like, it's actually some of the guys or women and whoever who have like built these big companies who've made sort of their money, whatever, who are the ones who are going to go push forward this decentralized future and create these decentralized platforms. I don't know.
I think on the technology side, absolutely. I'm less sure about the traditional media folks, but we'll see. We've gone an hour and 43 minutes. This is the longest podcast I think I've ever recorded. It's awesome.
This has been so fun though. Man, we really, we ran through a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. This is a blast.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap it up then and get into our weekend here soon. Carly, where can people find you and all the things that you do?
Carly P. Riley at Carly P. Riley, Twitter, all the socials. Mostly I'm on Twitter, and Overpriced JPEGs you can check us out on YouTube or you can, wherever you find your podcasts. I don't usually do a pitch for it, but I guess that's the pitch.
Derek, how about yourself? Let's give you your
same place as always. You can find me at DEREKEZWS. You can find my fund collab_currency. Feel free to DM me or reach out. Keep the inbox open. You can also find me hanging out in the Proof Discord. I'm in there from time to time, hanging out with the folks.
Sweet. I am at Kevin Rose on Twitter and also 5372.eth. Just kidding about that address. That is not mine. I don't have one of those. But this has been fun. This has been awesome. Thank you all for doing this. And what a great wide-ranging conversation. I have to go find some fashion NFTs now to buy. So
there we go.
Yeah, I know exactly. All right. Thanks, y'all. This is great.
See y'all. All right, that is it for this episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you would like to help us out, head on over to proof.xyz and click on the reviews button at the very top and leave us a 5-star review. Thanks so much. Take care.